What's up, Rick?
Hello, Matt. How are you?
Welcome back to the studio.
Fine day. It's cold out, dude. Cold.
Got real cold. It was 70 and about mid-morning yesterday, it dropped all of
Yeah, it went from 70 to like 41, which in Atlanta's cold.
Yeah. It's kind of embarrassing to say.
Yeah. I saw it was like negative temps up in Minnesota. I'm like, yeah, no thanks. If it gets to 28 here,
I got relatives that live up there. I swear they don't go outside for like 3 months. I wouldn't. Why would
I wouldn't either. I mean, it's beautiful up there, but man, it's cold. It's cold. So that being said, we're happy, fortunate to be where we are. And I know what we're talking about already. And that is
part 2 of our interview process and how to find a trainer.
Yeah. Hiring great trainers is a difficult task in today's market. It's the best job market we've had since, I believe, 1969. And so everybody, for the most part, is gainfully employed. So it's really hard to find people that, to bring into your business that aren't already employed somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're talking about. Part 1, if you guys haven't listened to part 1, go back and listen to where we find trainers or good places to start to actually identify good talent. I think that answers that question. And then before we get into part 2, which is going to be more about the interview or the sort of the onboarding process, right? Like once you identify some candidates, how do you take them through that process and how does that work? I want to reiterate something that we finished the last podcast with, which is if you find that you're just really struggling to attract the type of talent that you want. And what I mean by that is I have these conversations periodically with people and they'll say things to me like, there's no good people out there. They might say something ridiculous about like it's a millennial thing or people don't want to work hard or can't find these people in my business or people are ghosting me on their lunch break and I'm always like, I'm not saying that it couldn't happen in our organization, but we don't see that, right? If anything, we keep people here so long that we're trying to push them out of the nest to go and grow and do more. Mm-hmm. Just doesn't happen. And so what we mentioned in the last podcast, it goes back to this concept that I heard on someone else's business podcast, which is, are you the person that you're looking for is looking for? Which essentially means if you find yourself consistently attracting poor talent or people that will ghost you at lunch or no one seems to work hard in your organization, I think it's worth noting before we even dig in that you should probably start by looking in the mirror because you're not the person that you're looking for is looking for, right. Meaning you don't have the culture and leadership and style and eagles, if you will, instead of ducks don't fit into your business. And it's very easy for them to recognize that. Mm-hmm. They come in, they feel that culture, they talk to you, and maybe you have that little bit of angst around you can't find good people and somehow that gets emitted in the way you communicate with them during an interview or whatever that may be. And you don't end up with the good people because you don't have the culture that supports those people. And somebody that's a go-getter or a team player or just a really good overall, could be a good team member. They look around and it's like, I'm not like any of these people. So of course they're not going to stay.
Sure.
So I think it's just worth reiterating, if you're having a lot of trouble and you're getting good prospects in the door, but all of them turn out to be bad, in air quotes, you might want to consider looking at yourself in the mirror and your leadership style and your overall culture.
Cool.
So a little bit of, sort of tough love but I think it's important.
Yeah, we all need it, right?
Yeah, we do. And I do. I mean, shoot, we need it, right? I think everybody should self-check like that. So all that being said, let's move on to part 2, which is once you've identified a good candidate, what are our best practices in onboarding, interviewing, that type of thing? So what I'll start with is this. If you produce a potential team member through, say, an online ad, like an Indeed or Jobs.com, whatever that is, right? If you launch an ad, a true ad like that, you could in some markets get crushed with interest, right? And unfortunately, a lot of people still see personal training or coaching as almost like a side hustle.
Yep.
Right? It's something that you can't earn a living doing. And again, I'm being facetious. You can. That's sort of the general thinking is you can't earn a living being a coach. You get a lot of people who just, for lack of better terms, aren't serious. So what you need to do is you make sure that if you're not getting the sources that we talked about, interns or existing clients, which are great resources, if you're truly going out and hiring from the outside in, put some things in that ad that speak to the seriousnthe of the position, speak to the intrinsic motivations that coaches have, which is changing lives, doing things like that, right? And certainly what the parameters of the expectations for income would be as well. But just make sure you can head a lot of those things off at the pass if you simply describe what you're looking for and be detailed, like be serious about what you want, right? Because it might shrink your overall funnel at the top for new people, but that's not a bad thing if you write in exactly what you're looking for and why, right? So I'd say start with the ad copy, no different than ads, but put something in there along the lines of changing lives, being a good team member, following a systematic approach, all the things that you're going to value, right? And I would say start with core values. We haven't done a podcast on core values. I've done some short videos for some of our private pages, but you really want to perhaps mention some attributes that have to do with your core values in your ads, right? So that you're attracting the right type of person to the facility. Now, once you get applicants that put their hand up and say, hey, I'm interested. And again, sometimes you get deluged with a ton of applicants. And like, what do they say? Like the odds are good, but the goods are odd, right? It's like, oh, there's a lot of interesting people out here who, have no experience or maybe aren't certified at all. And again, you can put some of those things in your ad. Don't apply if you don't have a nationally accredited cert, if you want to go there, right? Then I would say to make sure that you're not spending a really large amount of time talking with individuals that may not be qualified, that you need to build some kind of a step or a barrier, or I would call it a tripwire. Remember we talked about tripwires, right? Like for those of you guys that aren't concept, as a side note, with what the concept of a tripwire is. Do you remember the book that we talked about? I think it was Decisive, which is Dan and Chip Heath. And they talked about David Lee Roth when he was the lead singer of Van Halen. There was always this sort of urban legend that when he rolled into town, he would order, one of the things he would order is a bowl of M&Ms in his dressing room. And I forgot which color it was, but he said, like as an example, leave out the brown M&Ms, right? And people were like, man, what a diva. Like he's ordering M&Ms and leaving out the brown ones. But when you really understood why he did that, they called it a tripwire, which means, look, he's in the age of like swinging around over the crowd, pyrotechnics, stage setup is key, right? And you're relying on a lot of the local talent that they're going to recruit in and whoever's coordinating all this. So in his mind, if you couldn't get that objective, executed clearly, which is just get the brown M&Ms out of my bowl,
right?
How could you be trusted to set up a fireworks show that could scorch everybody in the band, right? Yeah. And so they called it in the book a tripwire. So I like the same thing here in the interview process, right? Set up some tripwires, if you will, to get people from, yes, I'm interested, to actually you spending any time with them.
It's kind of weed out the people that aren't actually paying attention. They're just clicking on all the ads.
Yeah, I would like to be a personal trainer. I've worked out a couple of times, right? Like I'm pretty buff. It's like, oh, that's not it. But so how do we do that? Well, there's a couple of ways. So I would say that obviously review the resumes that you get. If they're crap, just skip it, right? If they're decent and you think it's a good candidate and they look good on paper, do a short phone call first. That'd be the first step, is just to reach out, ask a bunch of questions, right? The one who's talking is losing, just like sales. So just ask a bunch of questions about them, why they're interested, what they've done in the past, just your usual get to know you questions. Then you set a tripwire. And so we use currently a personality analysis, for lack of better terms. I know people are cringing that know more about this than I do, but that's what we call it. And essentially it's a tool that we will use. We'll email them a link and we'll say, take this. Ours is a company called Best Work Data. Take this test, and it essentially will tell us if this person is hardwired to execute the position that we want them to execute. So there's a couple of reasons why we do it. First of all, you'd be surprised at the number of people who are really interested, right? Who won't even take the time to click on the link and take the test.
Yeah.
So that's your tripwire. And as a matter of fact, it culls about 50% of the people that you run an ad for. So half the people are going to disappear immediately, and that's a good thing for you, right?
I'm not taking a test.
Right. What is this, a test? I'm not taking this. And we'll tell them, listen, this is not a test. It just kind of tells us how you're hardwired. It's not a tiebreaker. Sure. I mean, it's not the decision maker on whether or not you'll get this position, but it is factored into the decision overall. And we send them that. And so first of all, I like it because it's a tripwire, and people will either take it or they won't. It tells you a lot, right, immediately. And then secondly, I like the data that we get. So if you don't have one of these, there's 1,000,001 of them out there. I would highly suggest that you look into it. And not necessarily like a Myers-Briggs test about who you are, but more how you operate.
Right.
Because if you use one that has good scientific data behind it, it will not miss, right? Every time I've ignored the results of these tests, it's come back to bite me every single time. And so if you lob a test out there and you're like, all right, this person wants to be a personal trainer, right? The one we have, it gives you somebody's hardwired traits. Then you take a position that they're in, sales, customer service, training, and we've built those profiles, and you overlay that over top of their hardwired traits, and it will tell you whether or not that they're able to execute. Now, the company says it will eliminate about 30% of the people right off the bat that are literally not hardwired to do that particular job, right? And if so, great, good for us. Again, just less people that are going to have to spend time with. So it's a good tripwire, and for us, I like the data, right? Now, if you're not working with a service like that, you can go old school. The way that we used to set that tripwire was we would ask someone to come by the club and to pick up a questionnaire, and come by, pick up a questionnaire, take it home, fill it out, and then bring it back. Kind of old school these days in the digital age. You're not going to get as much engagement, but if you don't have some kind of a software to run some kind of personality analysis or screener for people, you need some kind of a tripwire. You're going to be interviewing every Tom, Dick, and Harry that says they're interested. And so we would have them set an appointment to come by. We would just leave this form at the front desk, right? And we would we would say something during the phone interview that would say, well, when do you think you'll be swinging by to pick that up? And they'd say, well, I'll be by tomorrow at 10 a.m. And you'd say, great, I'm going to leave this with the desk. Haley's going to be working at the desk. She's got it. She'll hand it to you. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Well, everyone on our team knew the directive was if that person showed up late to pick up their test, if you will, that was a no-go, because in training, you're working on the clock. So punctuality is very important.
When they're going to be late all the time, I can't make the first visit on time.
This is the best they're ever going to be. Literally, this is the best they're ever going to be on day one. So it's a tripwire, right? Yeah. Like, I show up, you didn't. They don't know that. It's like they think they're just swinging by, but you got a commitment for 10 a.m. It's going to tell you a lot about how punctual this person is if they show up late or not, right?
Well, I kind of like the fact that they have to show up versus just sending them a link. That's kind of weeds them out even more. You say it knocked out 50%, probably knock out 70%.
Yeah, it knocks them all out these days. It's like,
there's
I don't know.
Nobody.
Yeah, no one shows up. It does. It was even greater than 50%. I liked it when we didn't have a digital version. It seems a little bit antiquated now, but if you don't have a digital version, it still works. So swing by our place, get a commitment for time, hand them this test. Everyone asks, what's in the test? The test is it's really easy stuff. And what it is about your company. So what you want them to have done, ideally, is go onto your site and learn about your culture. How long have you been in business? What are you all about? Like, what type of services do you offer? It just make it specific to things that they could easily find online with any of your online presence. And don't let them fill it out there. Have them take it home. And so it forces them to go and do a little bit of research on your company. And then you tell them, when you return this to us, we'll set up your interview. And so if someone has made it, if they come by the facility and they were on time, they picked up the questionnaire, they took it home, they filled it out, they brought it back, turned it back in, and they did it on the day and the time that they said they would be back, you owe them an interview. It's the way we look at it.
Before we get to the interview, because I know some people are probably curious, what do you look for in terms of just their resume for a trainer?
I don't require a college degree, which is a departure from what we used to do in the past, right? So we would say you have to have an exercise science degree or something like that. But now that we control the programming, I'm really just looking for some type of, I would like a nationally accredited cert, but it's not essential. Like, we could pay for it. That's a bit easier to handle if we get someone who comes from within, like an intern who they have to get it to graduate college. They have to get the nationally accredited cert. And or if it's an existing client, we would help them through that process. If it's an outside source, it's just another way to, again, yet another tripwire, perhaps, just to say, listen, have a nationally accredited cert. So I would look for a little bit of experience, not even necessarily in fitness. I would look for it in the sense customer service, right? Like, let's take bartending as an example. So say you had a young, energetic person who was really interested in fitness. Maybe they were plugging their way through school, whatever that is, and you notice that they had been a server or had been a bartender, but they lived a fit, healthy lifestyle. They weren't out partying every night, right? And you knew that, and you could tell, and they looked the part, and they were energetic. That person's going to be really good at managing a couple of different people in what is considered a personal training setting, because a little bit of that is being able to bounce back and forth to people. Coach this, bounce over here, and we'll teach that sort of art of coaching. But somebody who can stand at a bar on a busy Friday night and make people feel like they're getting good service when the bar's 3 deep, packed, right? It's a skill. And so I would look for other parallel jobs or roles that they've been in that you think would closely relate to being a personal trainer, certainly in your setting. And in our setting, again, I'm using our particular, the way that we train, which would be training 6 people with 1 coach, you have to be a bit of a bartender in a lot of ways. So I would say that, and just look at work experience. Have they bounced around between, do they have a new job every 8 months? The research shows that in this day and age, most of the people in the age bracket that we'll be looking for will have 8 jobs in their first 10 years. So it's not as much of a deterrent as it used to be, because people, the loyalty kind of goes both ways, honestly, from company to person and person to company. And neither one of us are as loyal, I think, at this day and age as maybe we could be. Another subject. But look at that as well, if that's concerning. Cool. So yeah, just keep an open mind. Don't narrow frame your decisions to certification, experience in the industry and those type of things, right? Keep an open mind and understand kind of the type of person, right? Hire the right athlete, like last time. Hire the athlete, train the skill, right? So what is that athlete? Customer service, looks the part, great energy, good sense of humor, whatever those things are that have to do with your core values.
Okay, so they check the box, best works data, or they come into your gym, they get an interview.
Yes.
All right, so what's next?
So they show up for the interview. So people come in, you want to note how they're dressed. I've had people come in gym wear, which is fine. I've had people come in a coat and tie, which is also fine. Both I thought were a little interesting for the
tuxedo.
Step Brothers. Hello, Miss Lady. I think I can help with this whole Pam thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. So is it that off-putting? Because I've had people show up in a coat and tie, and I'm like, that's a bit odd for a personal training position. And it was when you did the interview. It's like it was odd. I thought, okay, this is no surprise. And then I've also had people show up like they just worked out. It's like, come on, let's go somewhere in between.
They got to show you their guns.
Yeah, exactly. Business casual is good, right? And are they on time? So let's say that we did the best work data instead of having them show up, and we didn't have that same tripwire. When they show up, are they on time? And if they're late, even 3 or 4 minutes late, you might as well turn them around at the door. And we've done this a million times. It's always an odd dynamic. Someone's at the door, you open the door, you don't even let them in the facility. You shake their hand and say, listen, you're already 5 minutes late. Mm-hmm. This is the best, in our experience, this is the best you're ever going to be. This isn't going to cut it. I'm sorry if some extenuating circumstance that caused it, but based on our history and our experience in the industry, this is not a good sign. So we're going to have to.
Man, you're helping them, honestly.
We are. Yeah, because you should see the stunned look on someone's face. Most people are so desperate to hire, they'll take anyone and they'll make their own excuses for them, right? Yeah. Just because they want them so bad.
I know traffic's bad out there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, me too. Hey, I was late too. Don't be that person, right? Own it and treat them like an adult. And again, like you said, you're probably doing them a favor. We do the same thing with our interns, by the way. Even if you're coming here for an internship, which you're only getting paid a mild stipend, and you show up late for the intern interview, turn them around at the door. I feel like that's probably more impactful because those folks are a bit younger. But anyway, are they on time? How are they dressed? Do they look the part? Do they look you in the eye? Do they shake your hand? All those sort of intangible things that you need them to have, you can read right away. What's the overall energy? That type of thing. What's their body language look like? And then you simply tour the facility, right? Give them a little bit of history, ask a bunch of questions. What were you doing before? Do you live in town? Some things are important. You'll have people that really want to coach at your gym, but in Atlanta, the traffic's pretty tough. It really is. So if someone lives 45 minutes away or 30 minutes away, in their mind, it sounds great, but we know historically speaking, that person's going to have a lot harder time getting there on time, and they're going to hate their life over time if they're having to commute during traffic times.
Hey, I live that far away.
Yeah, exactly. And you're still here. So, but you're unemployable by anyone else. So that's a whole different issue.
Oh my God.
No one else will take you. So are they dressed right? Did they get there on time? Where do they live? What's their family dynamic? Just trying to get an idea of who they are.
Sure.
Right? What are they all about? And then sit down and go through a interview. And I would say base your interview questions, because this is one we get a lot. What are the best interview questions that you ask? So we will ask interview questions that are really pertain to our core values. We'll do a podcast in the future, I'm sure, on core values, but we have 5 core values, and I like to build most of our interview questions around our overall core values. And I would suggest anyone do the same. If you don't have core values, build them. Once you have them, just base your interview questions around that. So as an example, one of our core values is own it. And own it, sort of like, I've heard other people use this term, be your own boss, right? That's really important in our organization because we're running and gunning, and we just want people that will take their role and own it, right? Or we want people that if they walk into the locker room and the shower curtains are open or the door's open or there's a little bit of, paper towel on the floor or something, that they'll just pick it up, that if not me, who kind of attitude, right? So you can build your interview questions around that. So as an example for Own It, we can just ask them a question where maybe, something didn't go well in their last job role, and to tell a story around it and what was the overall outcome. And if you just listen close enough, if there's a little bit of blame there, if it wasn't all their fault, that's not owning it, right?
Yeah.
You want to hear somebody say, yeah, well, what's a difficult position that you've been in at work and how did you solve it? Tell me the story. And they're like, well, I was doing this thing and I really screwed it up. Owning it's really important.
If they start talking a lot of trash about their former boss, is that good?
If it's me, sure. Otherwise, not so good. So yeah. So those are huge red flags, right?
What about the best works data that we've got beforehand? Do you ask questions around that?
Well, yeah. So the one that we use, which you mentioned, Best Work Data, they actually have suggested questions. So that, again, that's why a tool like that's so valuable. A, it's a nice tripwire. B, we get really good data from that. And so there's something that on our test that's called a false positive, which means that someone doesn't answer any questions that make them look bad. So obviously they're taking this sort of analysis.
Well, who wants to look bad?
Well, exactly. But they're taking this through this sort of lens of like, ooh, I want to be perfect, but nobody's perfect. So they might come up with what Best Work Data calls as a false positive, which means they are saying there's like nothing wrong with them, which is impossible. So you'd want to dig into that a little bit and challenge that. Like, hey, listen, I know you did your Best Work Data. We really appreciate you doing that. Came back great. Looks like you have these inherent talents, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be sitting there, obviously. But you can say, I would just ask directly, right? You came up with what's called a false positive, which means you admitted that you have no faults whatsoever. That person could be, in our experience, not coachable. Because if they feel, and again, if that's why you want them to tell you a story about a struggle they had at work, you'll start to hear a little bit of blame, a bit of shucking of responsibility, and that doesn't fit with Own It, right? I don't think that's good for any organization, but for ours, That's our first core value. So you really want to make sure that this person is self-aware, that they understand how they fit into your organization, into the world, and that they can admit if they made a mistake, and that means that they're going to be coachable. And that's our culture anyway, as you know. Like, we don't claim to know everything. We learn just as much from the younger folks that we hire that are in the trenches as we do from me going to a seminar or outside the industry, learning event or something. It's like you can learn from anyone, essentially, and that's what we believe in. And we all own our own roles and we own the responsibilities of it. So anyway, you could set up questions around that. And I would say a couple of other, like my favorite interview questions to ask, because one of our core values is humor. It's humor with a little crazy. So it's fitness at the end of the day. And so you can be a really good professional practitioner and or fitness business owner and still have a really good time. And that's really important to us. It's just fitness, so it's got to be fun, right? So one thing that I like to ask, and it also, this question will also test their ability to think on their feet, that bartender mentality that we talked about, is I will just simply look at them and say, tell me your favorite joke, and then just be quiet. And it's a very unnerving question. If I'm honest, it's really uncomfortable. And so even for you as the person asking it, just ask the question and be quiet and quit talking, right? So just say, hey, tell me your favorite joke. And I don't expect them to have a joke on deck. Like, that actually might be as off-putting as just them like almost melting, for pressure. But if someone has a joke, oh yeah, I got this one. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Like, who's got that many jokes like ready to tell at an interview? But what you want to see is that at least they can they'll get a chuckle out of it. They can roll with the punches. Some of the great responses I've had are like, okay, safe for work or not? Because this is a job interview. I'm like, that's a good, It was quick. It was thoughtful. There was a professional lens. I'm like, that's a great answer, right? I've literally had people sit there, turn beet red and almost cry. That's not good. Because as you know, when you're out on the floor and you're shuffling between people, that little bit of quick zinger humor here and there goes a long way. And it's part of our core values again. So if you can't kind of spar in that way humorously, you're probably not even going to be a good fit on our team, much less if you're going to be client facing.
Sure.
Right? So tell me your favorite joke, and you're just looking for something. You don't want a joke necessarily. You just want to see how they respond to that request, right? And another one that I love is, if I was new to town, what would you have me do? And I picked that up somewhere. I can't remember where, but again, I didn't create this one on my own. But if I was new to town, what would you have me do? And essentially what that tells you is, are they completely self-centered? And what I mean by that is, if their response is like, oh, you know what would be cool? You know what I love to do? I love this, and I love this, and I love this. Well, they don't know anything about you. So if I said, hey, I was new to town, well, If I was new to town, what would you have me do? If you were like, well, do you like this or do you like that? What do you like to do?
Right.
I want to see that they have a true interest in others, right? And so I want them to ask me questions about me. Then they can say, okay, well, if you like that, I think you'd really enjoy this because Atlanta has a really good, culture for this, and that, right? But if they're just like, oh, dude, it'd be sweet, do this, do that. They don't know anything about you.
Yeah, we had an interview like that the other day, actually.
Yeah.
I think the person talked literally about themselves and what they like to do.
Yeah, the whole time.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. I mean, it's got to be a little bit of that because you have to be in charge as a coach. Sure. You have to be confident, but just completely self-centered and self-absorbed is imagine what that looks like, say, because we're talking about trainers. What does that look like on the floor?
Right.
It becomes all about them. All they're doing is telling stories about their weekend. And you really want them to be the type of person that can input enough to keep the conversation going. But really it should be and always should be all about the client and what they want, right? So you should be listening to their stories about their weekend, whether you like them or not. That's your job.
Right.
And so you can only do that if you're the type of person that has a true interest in others and isn't listening but yet only waiting for your turn to talk about how awesome your weekend was to one-up them.
Our coaches here are so funny that the clients, they know this about them. They're literally trying to get them to talk about themselves, and some of them won't. They won't even say anything.
That's not allowed.
How was your weekend? Good. How was yours?
Right. Yeah, everything's a question. I don't know. How was your weekend? Yeah, exactly. It's like turning it on them every single time. So I would say those are two really important interview questions. And so if they do well in the interview, and again, build your questions around your core values. Those are just a couple of examples for us. But if they do well in the interview, I would say invite them back. And imagine what they've done. Say in our world, we did a short phone conversation.
Yep.
We sent them the best work data. They actually took it in a timely manner. We set up an interview. They showed up on time, dressed well, had the right body language and things. We sat down. They satisfied us in the interview, right? Then we have them back for a second, like live interview, and then just have two people on your team interview them. And it could be anybody on your team. It's always fun to pull in like a junior employee and say, somebody's working at the desk or something and say, hey, I want you to interview this person. It makes them feel good. And, you just say, like, here's the lens I want you to think about. Here's the concerns I had during my interview. Go for it, And it empowers the people that work on your team. They feel like they have a little bit of part on who you're bringing on, right? And we just tell them, listen, we don't bring anybody on unless they raise the average. That's what I want you to be thinking while you're talking to this person. Would they raise our average? Would they make us better than we are as a team? And then you might give them a few pointers on, so here's some hot spots I had, so maybe go there with them, right? Mm-hmm. And honestly, with a little coaching, anybody can sit down and have a decent conversation. If they're on your team already, they should be a good conversationalist anyway, right?
Yeah, sure.
So second interview, if that goes well, then we go into our mentorship, which we talked a little bit about last time, but it's basically a 6-week onboarding process where we pay them our minimal training fee to be here for 6 weeks. 20 hours a week is ideal. And everyone's like, well, they have to finish the 6 weeks. What if I need a trainer now? I would start everyone in the 6 weeks part-time because sometimes all these things go right and they took best work data and everything looks great and you put them out on the floor and for whatever reason, it just doesn't jive.
Absolutely.
It's happened a few times. You're a lot less likely to have that happen if you do all these processes correctly, but it will happen at times. And so if they get out on the floor and maybe they don't even like it, maybe they're like, this is too hard, or I feel like I'm bouncing around too much, or I don't know, confidence is shot, whatever that might be. It's not going to work. So I like something up front. But I will say this, if you get them out there and 2 weeks into the 6 weeks, they're like killing it and that they're going to be good. And the clients are like, I love so-and-so, he's awesome or she's awesome. I'm really glad you brought them on. That's a great hire. Yeah. Turn them loose, in the mentorship, get them on an employment agreement and get rolling with them. So you don't have to wait the full 6 weeks. And I would say this, if that's your intention going in, if you have to go the full 6 weeks to make your decision, the further along that you get into your 6 weeks, the less likely they are going to be a good hire. You should already know a lot, at least in 4 weeks, right?
I think I stayed around for like 10 weeks.
You did. I know. I just wasn't sure. I'm still not sure. Aren't you still on an internship?
Yeah,
a mentorship?
On the fence.
On the fence. You'll get paid eventually too. Cool. That'll be good. So again, that's our processes, right? And again, it's like anything. It sounds really simple, but it's not easy. So you just have to run the processes correctly. So that's all I would say. It's like, this isn't rocket science, but have a system, run the system, pay attention to the details, and stick to it. Stick to your rule about if somebody's 2 minutes late, you open the door, shake their hand, and send them on their way because you're wasting both of your times, right?
Yep.
So set up your parameters, set up your questions, stick to them, know what your predicted outcomes need to be, and go from there. And I would say that we've been very successful with that. Our average stay for people on our team is really long. Really long, in the 20 years, at times. So we're really proud of that, and we love everybody on the team. But, we get a lot of applicants, even for internships that we don't take through these processes, and we're probably, we might have missed a few, but I would say more often than not, we culled the herd in the right way before they got here. So that's all I've got, Matt. I hope that helps listeners. And do you have any other input or questions?
It's great stuff.
All right, buddy.
Thank you.
Good talk.
All right.